Welcome back to r/Neighbors from Hell, where people share stories about their crazy neighbors, and if you're new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe to join our amazing community, and without any further ado, let's dive right into the stories. And the first one is titled, Neighbors Screamed at My Girlfriend in Our Own Yard. A neighbor we have never even met, by the way. We found out he lives 3 houses down from us and wreaks havoc upon the circle behind us by screaming at children who ride their bikes on the road by his house. Anyway, this is all my girlfriend's story. I was unfortunately inside when it happened, but she handled herself pretty well. Happened 2 nights ago. So she was outside with our dog, they were walking around our backyard and ended up along the fence that separates us from our neighbor, a different guy, when all of a sudden this guy whips around the corner in his car. He stops his car and starts screaming at my girlfriend not to let our dog in people's yards. Obviously she has no idea where this is coming from because we don't let him do that. We are not going to make him walk on hot pavement, so he will walk along the side of the road in the grass, but it is not like he's going straight into people's yards. So she explained this all to him and he just continued to scream at her, proceeding to accuse her of letting him piss and crap in everyone's yards and that he has seen us let him do it in his own yard as well. My girlfriend had no idea if he was just flat out lying to be an a-hole or truly had them mistaken, because the dog doesn't do that stuff at all. He is really weird and is very particular about where he goes and only does it in his backyard. Even if he didn't, because I mean you cannot really control whether or not your dog decides to go to the bathroom on a walk, we have bags to bring along just in case. The guy was not having any of it though, he just kept screaming and cussing her out and started driving away, so my girlfriend finally told him to piss off. He yelled back, "I know where you live, honey." And he abruptly slammed on his brakes and sat there for a few seconds. She is not sure what he was planning, but he sped off when she pulled her phone out and started taking pictures of his car. We reported him to our neighborhood's president and then yesterday afternoon reported him to the police. We knew nothing could be done about it, but we at least wanted it on record in case we have any further issues with the guy. This guy has apparently attempted to be elected president of the neighborhood in the past and has tried to get dogs banned, even though almost every single house has a dog. So yeah, interesting human. The cop paid him a visit last night and now it is all the talk of the neighborhood that someone finally reported this a-hole to the cops. My girlfriend got a call from the president's wife with a congratulations for standing up for herself and a reassurance that they are all on our side. And guys, please correct me if I'm wrong, but this kind of sounds like an HOA neighborhood where the president is actually a good person, because they probably wouldn't allow a lunatic like the neighbor to become the next HOA president. Update 2. Neighbor screamed at my girlfriend in our own yard. Quick update to the post I made last week. We haven't encountered him since that night, thankfully, and haven't had any issues since. We have heard from 2 of our other neighbors that the guy has been over to their house complaining about what had happened. From both of these neighbors we were told that the guy thought my girlfriend was someone else entirely, not that it makes what he did okay, and they both apparently told him who we really were. Finding out that he was mistaken, he said to one of them, "Great, now I've gone and made enemies from another house around here." Yep, that is true, idiot. Maybe don't go running your mouth like an a-hole and people won't hate you. Since then, it sounds like he's already had it out with the daughter of a good friend of his also in our neighborhood. Clearly he hasn't learned his lesson. Not like that surprises me at all. And you know, Ripe Stars, I just think that some people need that neighborhood drama, maybe because their lives are too boring without it. But by the way, if your life is too boring without my videos, then please don't forget to post some star emojis in the comments if you want to support me. Thank you very much in advance. And the next one is titled, You want me to invite my friends over so you can intimidate them? Well, okay. So, a few years ago, my wife and I had to move to a seedy little apartment in a bad part of town because we were poor. The neighbors were interesting. Lots of drugs, lots of parties, which was not too awful I guess, but they also were violent. There were fights every night. A week after we moved in, some tenants went to jail because they stabbed a few people, I guess. Yeah guys, that doesn't sound too awful. Well, for me, that sounds like the definition of Neighbors from Hell. But maybe I set the bar too high. Anyway, now normally my wife and I just kept our heads down and minded our own business, but it turns out the next door neighbor really did not like us. He would move his car into our parking spot when we left for the day, like to stand on our stoop and block our way to our own door. And occasionally pounded on the paper-thin walls between our apartments and shouted things like,
"Yeah, I'm loud. What the F are you going to do about it? What the F are you going to do about it?"
Living with such an intrusive and unstable neighbor was not fun, especially considering my wife was pregnant and we didn't really feel safe. The landlord was not helpful in the slightest, so we began actively looking for a new place, planning on breaking our lease if we had to. One day the crazy neighbor was hanging out just outside our door with a bunch of shady looking people. I tried to politely make my way through to get to my door, but they butted me aside.
"My crew will F you up. We will F you up,"
says crazy neighbor. I get pissed and tell him in so many words that he would not be so intrusive and threatening if he knew who I hung out with.
"Yeah, you call up your friends. You call them right up. My crew will F them up,"
he shouts at me. I eventually make it into my apartment, where I stew in anger about the whole situation. Now, normally I would just ignore this guy, but he was clearly escalating his behavior. And I, being a gentleman, decided to take him up on his offer of having some friends over for a friendly time of joy and fellowship. Did I mention that my dad, my uncle and two of my cousins were patrol officers with the sheriff's department? I hadn't talked to them about my neighbor situation because I didn't want my tires to get slashed, but I figured now was as good a time as any to let the crazy apartment complex know that maybe, just maybe, they should find someone else to mess with. I called my dad up and explained my neighbor's behavior and said I was not interested in any kind of formal police stuff just yet, but wouldn't you know, he wants all my friends to come over. We could have a grand old time. My dad laughed and said he would see what he could arrange. I should note here that me and crazy neighbor had our own side entrances on the right side of the building, while everyone else had units inside the actual building. So if I were to, say, have some friends over in the parking lot, we would be right outside crazy neighbor's door. Well, 4 or 5 days later, I had my friends over. About a dozen uniformed police officers, mostly sheriff deputies, but a couple of state troopers as well. We had a big barbecue right in the parking lot, eating steaks and having a grand old time. We had a few laughs at my neighbor's expense as he kept pulling his curtain aside and peeking out his window, but was clearly not interested in coming out. I got the courage to knock on crazy neighbor's door after a couple of beers and said, "Hey, my friends are over. Didn't you want to F up my friends? You and your crew? Here they are." Mysteriously, he did not come to his door. There were usually tenants out walking around or visiting each other throughout the day, but not this day. Dead silence around the whole apartment complex. The next day, my fears of revealing my friendly ties to the local police were realized as I went out to go to work and found that my car's tires had been slashed to pieces, and this time I did the proper thing and made a police report, which my uncle personally responded to, going to crazy neighbor's door and asking if he saw anything. 2 weeks later, my wife and I moved into my parents' basement as my dad had decided that he did not want me living in that complex. I don't think I ever told him where exactly I lived before the barbecue, and he was probably freaked out to realize that it was a shady place with a high call volume. My wife and I were able to find a much nicer place of our own before my son was born. I saw crazy neighbor's mugshot in the paper a couple of months later. Turns out he had been trying to cook meth on his stove and started a little fire. And ripe stars, I am wondering, have you ever had any criminal neighbors or any neighbors that got arrested by the police? Let us know in the comments and share your story. And the next one is titled, Absolutely Mr. Neighbor. I have a neighbor who's a bit of a troublemaker. A bit of a backstory: he has 4 cars and often parks them all on the street, completely filling the street in front of his and my house. When he is not working on his car with air wrenches or washing them, he is probably idling his tow truck. Oh yeah, he has a tow truck too, just rumbling away outside of my house. People are constantly coming and going from his house, likely for illicit reasons, but no way to prove that. There was a period where the police were at his house multiple times a week about 2 years ago, but that has subsided to once every couple months. He lives with his grandma, who is immobile, and you no longer see her anymore except when the ambulance comes and takes her to the hospital alone. Last week, when I was walking out of my house to take my son to daycare, he came stomping across the street and started to be all buddy-buddy with me, so I immediately knew something was up. He asked if we can keep my dog, a German Shepherd, inside in the morning until 7 AM because he is tired of her waking him up. She is a shepherd, she barks, we limit it as best as we can, but a dog is going to dog. I say sure and continue buckling in my kit. He then continues on and says to not take pictures of him or his house. I point to the camera overhead, which is oriented in a way to see my front door, driveway and his house. I put it up to keep an eye on him and my property since he has a hot head and I don't trust him to not do something stupid, and then to take the cake he told me to stop following his wife and explained that she said I followed her home multiple times. I explained to him that I lived across the street and from time to time we will both be coming home at the same time and that I have better things to do than park a mile away from home to follow her home. So for the malicious compliance, it comes back to keeping my dog inside until 7 AM so he can get his much needed beauty sleep. Now, instead of leaving her dog door unlocked at night and her going out in the morning when she wakes up, usually around when we wake up at 6:30 AM, we lock it at night and unlock it on the nose at 7 AM, but at 7 AM when I let her out, I tell her to speak for about 5 minutes. More often than not, she would go out in the morning pee and come back in with no one any the wiser. Not anymore, now she goes out and barks up a storm for a few minutes. And the next one is titled, Awful Landlord Wanted His Apartment Painted at the End of the Lease. This actually happened a few years ago to my mom's neighbor. I talked to her this Friday and was amazed how people can be a-holes. A few years ago, she and her husband wanted to rent an apartment as newlyweds and somehow new in the country. They did not have lots of money, so they ended up renting something in a crappy town. The landlord was not very nice to begin with, but the price was reasonable and the place looked okay. After negotiating about the price and terms, they signed a contract with him. They are good independent people, so they thought they wouldn't need to be in contact with him. Time has come to move in. They tried to meet him so he will give them the keys, but he avoided them for a few days until one day he told them that the keys are in the mailbox. They got in and they were in shock. The a-hole left them with an empty apartment, and by empty I mean no lights and lamps. He took out the air conditioners, he even took out the power outlets and switches, left on the tap in the kitchen, and they spent huge sums of money just to be able to live there. Of course, he could hardly be reached, and if there was something wrong with the place infrastructure, he didn't repair it or stalling them for long periods of time, so they will give up and pay for the repairs themselves. Nearing the end of the lease, the couple decided to give the man a taste of his own medicine. They met him so he can examine the place before legally releasing them from the contract and giving them back their collaterals. Everything was okay, the place was painted and they took everything that they installed. It was fine by him. They told him that the contract is to be voided tomorrow. They would spend the night at the apartment and leave the keys in the mailbox. He said okay and left. They spent the whole night repainting his apartment, but this time in black. They painted literally every inch of the place black. By the time they finished the place, it looked like a bat cave. The contract said that the apartment should be given back painted, but it didn't say what color it should be. Of course, he called the next day, and of course they did not answer. And guys, that is what you call textbook perfect malicious compliance. Have you ever had to deal with any landlords that tried to scam you? If you have any awful landlord stories, please feel free to share them on r/ripe stories on Reddit, which is our own subreddit. And if your story is interesting, there's a good chance that I might read it in a video. The next one was posted by user Nelate. When I was a teenager and lived with my parents, we had this one neighbor family that seemed sort of off. One day the father knocks on our door and tells my parents they have not had power for a long time and beg to run an extension cord to one of our outside outlets for the day so his young kids could have cold milk with their cereal in the morning. My parents agreed to do this for one day. The neighbor kept up their part and disconnected the cable after that day. A week later they hook it back up again without us noticing. A month goes by and our electricity bill is basically double what it normally is. Parents head to the backyard and find the cable plugged in, yank it out and confront the neighbor. At first the father does not show his whole body and cracks the door, but my stepdad gets him to open up the door after pointing out that he's concealing a gun. He did not have to pull the gun out. Stepdad demands an explanation as to why the cable was run to our outlet, and the dude just sorta mumbles incoherently and shuts the door, locking it. Bad neighbor family was in a duplex and their neighbor, sharing the building, comes around and asks what's up. Parents explain the whole story and how the next step was calling the police. Good neighbor is a former police chief and is friends with the entire force. He offers to make the call. Several cop cars arrive. Bad neighbor father and mother are arrested. Turns out they were running a meth lab inside the house. The mother was selling her own body, and the kids, a boy and girl between ages 7 to 10, were malnourished. The kids were put into foster care. No other bad neighbor has beat that high score yet. I gotta say guys, that story took a very sudden, surprising turn, and it sorta reminds me of the TV show Breaking Bad. Does anyone remember that show? Let me know in the comments if you do. And the next one was posted by user Macadamia Ice Cream. He used to stand on the footpath drunk every afternoon and yell to my husband about what a bitch I was. Once my husband told him to go home and he shaped up to try and punch my husband, who was around 50 years younger than the neighbor. My infraction? He rang one day to check why my husband's car was home on a workday. I politely thanked him for his call and let him know my husband was sleeping and had a cold, nothing to worry about. Apparently, I was meant to praise him profusely for being such a caring neighbor, and my husband was meant to follow up with a call once he was awake and also lavish him with praise for caring. Because we didn't, we got to hear about it loudly every afternoon until we moved several months later. The next one was posted by user Tracing Broads. Ah, Jerry. When I moved in, he seemed eccentric but harmless. Apparently, my landlord had a conversation with him and told him to leave me alone. This upset Jerry greatly. He cornered me one day while I was unlocking my door and asked me to come sit with him in his apartment. I don't think the place had ever been cleaned, and he had hoarder mentalities. He drank a bottle of wine in about 30 minutes, commenting on all the sad things in his life. Luckily, he passed out, so I could leave. A couple weeks later, he got into a 3 a.m. fight with his boyfriend, which resulted in his boyfriend trying to get into my apartment for safety and eventually breaking into an empty unit down the hall. Cops were called, and Jerry was taken to jail. About a week after that, same boyfriend was over and a fight ensued. This time it ended in very loud intercourse. Jerry would flush things you are not supposed to flush down the toilet and would back up sewage into mine and my neighbor's bathtubs and bathroom sinks. Eventually, he clogged his toilet so badly that he just ripped it from the wall and left it there. The cops came twice to my door to ask if I had seen Jerry lately and asked to search my apartment to make sure I was not hiding him. One day, while I was getting ready for work, he came into my apartment with another guy and tried to measure my walls for the renovation he was going to do to combine his and my apartments into one unit. But don't worry, I could just live with him when it was all finished. Eventually, Jerry got evicted but would still convince people to let him into the building. For months his mugshot was pasted on all entrances saying not to let him in. And the next one was posted by user Not So Little Lion Girl. He had 2 access roads to his property. He did not live there, he just had livestock there and insisted on using the one that cut through our property, despite the fact that it was the longer route and it was a literal unpaved road through the woods. He did not have an easement or anything, just assumed that since he had to drive through our property to get to that crappy lane road, he was allowed to do so. He was a total dick to us for no reason, never said hi, got upset if we were too close to his property, despite the fact that he literally drove through our property every day. Revenge came when lightning struck a tree in the woods and it fell right across the access to the lane road on our property. He hired a service to chop the tree up and told them that they could have the wood as part of the payment. It was nice walnut. My dad was not having any of that. He walked down there with a copy of the sale documents, pointed out the marker that clearly separated our land from our a-hole neighbor's land, got the neighbor to admit that the tree in question was both from our land and currently laying on our land, not his, and then my dad sent the crew packing and told them if they took so much as a branch from that tree, it was theft and he, a lawyer, would see them in court for it. It has been over 15 years and that tree is still laying across the access to the lane road. He can still access his property via the other road, so he did not have a leg to stand on to force an easement. F you, Jim. And the next one was posted by user Death-tastic. Got his cop buddies to come put stickers on our cars claiming they were illegally parked, so we had to move them so he would have room for his guests to park. I bought a corner lot in a newer subdivision, so I have curb and sidewalk on two sides of my property. The side of my house has plenty of room for parking, which I sometimes use and my stepson uses as well, and sometimes the other neighbors I like use. New neighbor bought a house on the other side of the street from my side and does not have a lot of street parking for his lot. He claims that the parking on my side of the road is his because it is across the street from his house. When confronted about the fact that it is just parking and no way belongs to him, me or anybody, he told us he knows people in the police department that can take care of this. He also picked this time to scream pretty specific mean things about all his new neighbors and how each one was crappy like he is watching us. And the next one was posted by user UnderBlackWings. Please allow me to vent because I am in the throes of this BS at the moment. First, they have 4 mini dachshunds that never shut the F up. I cannot even open my back door without these little dogs going off, and they just leave their dogs outside all day. I enjoy sitting outside on a nice day and reading, but nope, I cannot concentrate over the ear-splitting constant yapping. Now, I am a dog person, I own dogs and love dogs, but this complete lack of consideration is mind-boggling. Second, they rent and I own, but the crazy ass wife told me she owns a 3-inch strip of my property and they will be moving the fence over. I don't have a huge yard, but that is a lot of space, and did I mention they rent? I brought out my survey to say, no, you don't own it, and no, you're not going to be moving the fence. And she continued to say that they had their own survey, but refused to show it to me. Third, they seem to think it's no big deal if they come into my yard. I came home from work to find that they had moved their water drainage into my yard. In addition, they complain about my tree and ask me to cut it down. I said no. They put their garbage cans in my driveway. I have witnessed the wife empty her vacuum cleaner in my driveway. She has blown piles of leaves that have not even come from my tree into my driveway. Even after I put locks on my gate, she climbed up a ladder and leaned over the fence and blew all the leaves in my yard, and that were already in piles all over my yard. After that, I put up cameras and have future plans to press charges for trespassing the next time this crazy woman pulls another stunt. She accused me of calling the police about her daughter's illegal car. I did not. And putting up a note complaining about her garbage. I did not. She has called the health department multiple times on me for my grass being too long. It wasn't, and the health department did not cite me. Listen, all I want to do when I come home after a day at work is to hang out with my dogs and not effing talk to anyone or deal with any of this shit. I don't know what to do about her. It is like all these little things she does that toe the line at illegal, and I feel like if I call the police, they are just going to look as it is a petty neighbor squabble instead of harassment. And guys, indeed, if you just look at the things that the neighbor does, it seems a little bit petty. However, if you count all of this together, then it is definitely a form of harassment. If you were in OP's shoes, What would you do about that neighbor? Would you call the police? Let us know in the comments. And Ripe Stars, unfortunately we have already reached the end of today's video. I hope you enjoyed the content. However, if you cannot wait for more Ripe content, then I suggest you head on over to patreon.com/ripeyoutube, where you can find more exclusive Reddit content read by me. Patreon subscriptions start at just $1 per month, and for $1 your name will show up at the end of each of my new videos. However, if you are willing to spend $3 per month, you will get access to more than 50 exclusive Reddit videos, mostly just no mother-in-law stories. However, please understand, I don't want to pressure anyone into spending money, because I am already incredibly grateful that you watch my videos every single day. Thank you so much for your daily support, it really means the world to me, and I hope to see you again tomorrow for the next video.